Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Political Vigilante. I'm Graham Elwood. This article was sent in by Patreon supporter Alex Ratliff. Alex, thank you so much for supporting the show. And this article came out a couple years ago about predatory capitalism. And it's called Predatory Capitalism, Old Trends and New Realities. It was written by CJ Polychroniou, and it's from truthout.org. And basically, this is, and it's a very lengthy article. I'll put it in the show notes. Obviously, it's worth going over, but it goes over sort of what got us here and the type of capitalism that is being used and how it is basically destroying our society. Because it's not democratic or egalitarian in any sense. The capitalism is solely designed to take money out of the bottom and give it to the top. And its goals, as this article goes into, has one goal, to make the top extremely wealthy. And one of the things it needs unemployment. And it is, and all of the things sort of trickle down theories and stuff that we've heard, that's just propaganda. So basically, the article goes into how it is a ruthless economic system and it needs to exploit workers. And the only time where it was doing okay was in post-World War II, and I've talked about this because Noam Chomsky talks about this. That was the most highly regulated time in American history. FDR passed all this regulation, and then of course we were in World War II. So out of World War II, and war was a boon to our economy. So it put everybody to work, and military production it created jobs. It actually got women in the workforce because the majority of the men were fighting overseas. And then out of World War II, there was all this financial regulation. We had won the war, obviously, and so the American economy was booming and the middle class was booming, and it was all largely because a bunch of progressives got and put a bunch of regulation together. But I'm going to read you some stuff in here specific to this article, and can also kind of give some insight into maybe what we can do. I mean, obviously there's an obvious answer of just going completely socialist, which isn't a bad system. And people who are like afraid of socialism, I always say, well, if you're really scared of socialism, then you should be scared of the fire department, the police department, trash pickup, street cleaning, snow plows, parks, public schools, libraries, all those scary socialist things that have infiltrated our society. So what this article goes into, it says stuff like this. Capitalist expansion has taken place in the course of history via different venues, ranging from plunder and exploitation through trade to investment in industry and the financialisation of assets. Yeah. So here's what he goes into. The logic of the accumulation of capital leads to enormous wealth. There is no other known economic system which can match capitalism's inherent capacity to generate wealth. That's why they love it so much. On the one hand, and to the relative impoverishment of the working population on the other. Unemployment is the structural element of capitalism. The manifold activities of capitalist accumulation also tend to accelerate the process of the concentration and centralization of capital, eventually giving rise to the dominance of finance capital and to the emergence of financialisation as a possible new stage in the evolution of capitalism, which is what has been going on. The banking industry, which, we've talked about this before on the show. One of the things about the last housing crisis that was unseen before was, so banks, when they give mortgages, it's in their best interest actually to keep people in their homes under the old system, under the system that was helped to deregulate by Clinton getting rid of Glass-Steagall in 1999, was then this crisis that hit in '08 with the bailout from Bush in '08 and then the subsequent additional bailout from Obama in '09, it was in their best interest to screw people out of their homes. They made more money from forcing foreclosure, which is what this is talking about. Is financialization is the new stage. So just because they also know, and there's another bubble coming, and when it happens, they'll get bailed out again, especially with Trump in office. So let me read this. There's no point in going into the details here about the history of global capitalism, but suffice it to say that capitalism has a long and brutal history of expansion, exploitation, and injustice dating back to the 15th century and to the subsequent rise of imperial powers across Europe and North America, with the subjugation and exploitation of people and resources from a periphery of providing the growth engine for the economics of imperial centers. So yeah, the imperialist countries of Europe started slavery. Oh, we need slave labor. We need cheap labor to build our things, to get our resources. We need to go plunder resources. That's what's happening now. That's why America is in 7 or 8 wars now with Somalia. So I'm going to read this about where we're at today. A study released in early 2014 by the British humanitarian group Oxfam International shows that the richest 1% had 65 times the total wealth of the bottom half of the population. Stating the case of inequity in more dramatic terms, the report reveals that the richest 85 individuals on the planet share a combined wealth that is equal to that owned by the bottom half of the world's population. That's even been updated. I did an article earlier. This article is several years old that came out earlier this year about there's like 8 or 9 people own more wealth than the bottom half, or only the same amount. Along with increasing inequity, mass unemployment is once again displaying itself in an intrinsic future of capitalism, and poverty rates are sharply on the rise. There is a consensus that today's young people in the Western world will be worse off than their parents' generation. Why is capitalism fouling things up again by returning to more ugly practices of the past? It is because today's capitalists are greedier than those in the past. Is that the reason? If we assume that this is rather silly suggestion is true, greed alone can hardly explain away why capitalism is running amok in our own time. For a convincing answer to the question of why capitalism has embarked on a journey back toward the future, and perhaps in the process is making the money class even greedier, we need to come to terms with the structural changes in the operation of the capitalist economy. And, Hedges talks about how, and Noam Chomsky, I'll make this quote from Chomsky, the single greatest adversary of giant corporations is the population. And squeezing as much out of them as possible is the whole goal, right? And you need people that are in debt. You need, but I think and as Hedges reports in Death of the Liberal Class, this rampant, crazy, greedy capitalism has forced them, and all of us as a result, into a corner, which is why 60% of America is what has been called the working poor. It's it's around, 60% of the population can't handle a $500 emergency. Can't handle it. And people are working 2 and 3 jobs, and they don't have health care, and they don't have retirement, and they're just barely getting by and paying their bills. And then the rich class, the powerful politicians and the corporate people are, oh, maybe you shouldn't have your iPhone. And it's all that bootstrap shit. Well, you can bust your ass and work 40, 50 hours a week at minimum wage, and you're not getting ahead. And God help you if you have any sort of health issue. Pope Francis, in this article, hit the nail on the head when he described today's capitalism as a new tyranny. Today's brand of capitalism is particularly anti-democratic and simply incapable of functioning in a way conducive to maintaining sustainable and balanced growth. By waging the most vicious class warfare in the entire post-war period, the economic elite and their allies have managed to roll back progress on the economic and social fronts by resurrecting the predatory free market capitalism that immiserated millions in the early 20th century, while a handful of obscenely wealthy individuals controlled the bulk of the wealth. And we're seeing this at everything I've talked about on this show just about relates to this. I always say follow the money. And it usually relates to oil, but not just oil. The private prison industry has created slavery. The militarization of police, they're just going out rounding up slave labor for the private prison industry. Or for Hillary Clinton, she had slave labor at her mansion while in Arkansas. You need the liberal class. One of the things how they have betrayed us is the liberal elites have embraced globalization and said it's this wonderful thing. All it is just a mechanism through which capitalism can plunder the earth and subjugate more people into abject poverty. This is the single greatest disparity, as they said, in wealth since in the post-war era. I mean, the last time we had this kind of shit was in the czarist era, where you had kings just, I mean, this is what's going on. And let's go into some of the solutions here real quick. One of the other things that was in the Oxfam International report is Thomas Piketty's publishing sensation, Capital in the 21st Century. Does it with such powerful impact that, as Paul Krugman said, writing in the New York Review of Books, it may very well change both the way we think about society and the way we do economics. That's what needs to happen. We need to just rechange everything, because I don't know how we're going to do this. We need to completely reform everything and regulate everything. And I don't know. I'm not sitting here, as I've said, I'm not advocating some sort of bloody overthrow, because violence begets more violence. And when you get into a violent revolution or violent overthrow, it's awful. And the only people willing to, then you're allowing like people who have already committed a lot of violence and criminals and stuff to kind of take over, and then they will start abusing their power. And we've seen that time and time again. So, what is the solution? I don't know. It might be going to full socialism. But I'll tell you who the cause is the corporatization. And also, this is where the neoliberals, I'll read this quote from the article. Neoliberalism, with its emphasis on corporate power, deregulation, the marketization of society, the glorification of profit, and the contempt for public goods and values, provides the ideological and political support needed for the financialization of the economy and the undermining of the real economy. This is the corporate state. This is what we're talking about, right? And the liberal elites let this happen. The neoliberals let this happen. Talking about how great. Because as I've said, the liberal class was all yay, NAFTA and globalization, because if you're a college-educated liberal, you're going to have a decent job. If you're a working class person, you've lost your job. And this is why you create this kind of inequity. This is why a lunatic like Trump is able to come to power, because the Democrats have offered no real solution. It's why Bernie Sanders and his progressive policies is the most popular politician in America today. They did another study. 80% of people who call themselves Democrats are in favor of him. He is the only reason keeping any progressives tied to the DNC. If he leaves, this is why there was some draft Bernie at the last live Jimmy Dore show that I was on in Flappers in Burbank. I get the whole draft Bernie thing, getting him to just break away from the DNC and run, because he'll take all these progressives with him and maybe some real change will happen, because he is not afraid to say, I'm a socialist. So I'll read this last quote. There can be no mistake that the transition from the domination of capital in general to the domination of finance capital emerged as a key feature of modern capitalism even before the outbreak of World War I, which was called a Wall Street War. And are a bunch of references. I mean, there are 30 some other articles and books referenced here, and so this is extensive reading, and what maybe we can do. And so the last line in the article, the future of a progressive social order probably requires nothing short of the reversal of all of these trends that we've talked about. We need serious change, and as I've said before, it starts on the local level. Find some change. Get your city to divest. I pulled my retirement account out of Wells Fargo and put it into a credit union. My business accounts are still with Wells Fargo because I haven't found a lot of credit unions in the LA area that are good with business accounts. Either they just don't have them or whatever, but that's how you do it. Get your school, get your city to divest. Go to small banking, go to non-for-profit banks, and this will help. It'll start, all of us have to do it on a little bit of a local level, and it'll take a real leader, someone to step up there. I don't know if it's Bernie. He might be too old by 2020. I don't know, but we need to back, another reason we need to back real progressives, because this is only going to get worse unless we do something about it. So I thank you, Alex Ratliff, and all of the Patreon backers. This is what you get at the $5 level and up. You get to suggest an article or a subject for me to talk about. Alex, thank you for sending me this, for shedding light on all of this for all of us. And thanks for watching.